I think we've got a treat for you. My guest, I'm pumped to have him with us this episode. His name is Rick Alexander. Rick is an author, speaker, and educator who specializes in helping individuals and organizations understand themselves better so that they can increase performance, find meaning in their work, and build a life that is in alignment with their ultimate goals. Rick is a former member of the Naval Special Operations community as well as an ultra-endurance athlete. Rick crafts content to help people lead through adversity and into a life of meaning. You can hear his ideas on his podcast, Morning Coffee, which airs Monday through Friday, or by picking up a copy of his debut book, Burn Your Couch. Also, his latest book, Ambitious Heroes and Heartache. Let's jump in with Rick Alexander.
Myself at the mirror and question things that I once accepted, now I don't see it.
So you just came out with your second book, Ambitious Heroes and Heartache. Can you take a few minutes to kind of take us from you being a high school athlete to an ambitious hero?
Yeah, I think I'm on the heartache spectrum, to be honest with you. I think hero might be too ambitious of a word for me. For me, like in high school, really, like when I think back to high school, sports were the thing. Being an athlete was the thing. I mean, if it were not for that, like I guarantee I would have ended in a really bad place because school just didn't interest me that much. And there were a lot of things that didn't interest me that much at the time, but for whatever reason, sports was one of the things that did. And so it really was like my north arrow in high school, and like really kept me eligible, right? Because that in high school, that's the game, you got to stay eligible. So it's like, I will care enough so that I can do the thing I truly care about, and then so getting out of high school, it's like I can look back at all of the different things I did. Of course, I went into the military and I went into a job that was very physically demanding, and so like I had really used a lot of my life was really just like relying on athletic prowess to get through things. And, as you move through life, you start to develop narratives about yourself. And so I developed these narratives about the fact that I couldn't succeed in school and different, in academic rigor and different things like that. And about halfway through my career in the military, I actually decided to go try to be a special operations combat medic, which has a very high attrition rate. Out of the 79 people that started my class, 16 finished. So it's a very high rate. All basically, if you're in special operations in any capacity, whether that's Green Beret, SEAL, SWIC, you go through this course if you want to be a medic. And so it was really cool because I came together with like, really all my brothers from different SF backgrounds, made a ton of friends. But really, to me, what happened is I proved to myself that I could succeed at like a high academic level. And it's actually pretty funny looking back because my ASVAB score, which is like it tells you basically whether you're smart enough to do what you're smart enough to do in the military. Mine wasn't high enough to get into that school in the Army because I blew it off in high school and didn't care about it when I took it. But coming from the Navy, we didn't have that clause. So I kind of like got under the loop, and I actually finished honor grad in my class. I finished first in my class. And so for me, it was like, oh, wow, I realized that this rigor that I had used to succeed athletically, I could actually apply to anything. And I think that really is the story. I think that's why we do all of these things. It's like, it's great to score the goal, to score the touchdown, to do the thing. But man, it's not really about the game you're playing now. It's actually about whether you can win all of the games across the period of your life, and or whether you can have a bigger win column than loss column, and all the things that you're going to do across the spectrum of your life. And so for me, it's been like a really up and down road of just trying to figure out. Once I realized that I had that ability, it's like, oh, okay, so I started to look at life as my teacher, and I started to realize like all of the things that I'm doing, I'm constantly learning lessons that I can apply to other endeavors. And I think, I hope as an author and as a speaker, that's one of the things that I bring to the table is such a wide breadth of things that I've done, just because I've always been so experimental with different things and trying to find out like, where are my limits? And I think really what that comes down to, and it was cool because, for people that don't know, I came to where you work in the high school and gave a talk. And I remember a few kids stayed after and were talking to me, and man, I just saw that part of myself that's like, there's something deep in you that is like, you're capable of so much. And there aren't always outlets that allow you to find that, right? So for me, like writing has allowed me to find that outlet and really push my limit there and my intellectual ability. And in sports, it was the same thing. And so I don't really feel like I'm doing anything different, to be honest with you. It's all kind of the different variations of the same journey.
Right on. Well, I know our kids loved the time they got to spend with you. You touched on it a little bit there. You've gone through BUDS training. You've been through Green Beret training. But it's kind of your outlook on just mental toughness as it applies to life that kind of has always intrigued me. How do you define mental toughness? Having endured a lot of physical things, what do you really circle around to define being mentally strong?
Can I ask you what part of the mental toughness, what part of it intrigues you?
We had talked before, and you had mentioned, some of these things along your journey that have been physically demanding, but you, in that moment back then, you had circled back to really more of the idea of you can do physically demanding things, but do you really love yourself?
Yeah.
Are you connected? And that was kind of the idea back then that kind of you don't hear from military, I would say, stereotypically.
Sure.
Through their journey or through their process, especially ones that have, the accolades that you have throughout your service. So it was just that different perspective of really that internal flame lighting the mental toughness versus outside definition.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So just to like clarify, I think it'd be a little disingenuous to say I went through, like, because I didn't go through all of those pipelines, right? My job just required me to go through different portions, which had high like attrition rates or whatever, but sure. Just to clear that up. So when we talk about mental toughness, I think what we're talking about is resiliency, right? I think that's at the end of the day, it's like, how solid of a human being are you? I think there's a lot of people that right now, this is a perfect time to talk about. I don't know when this will come out, but I'm sure we'll still be in the pandemic when it does. And I think there's a lot of people that pride themselves on being really mentally tough. I know how I ran the Boston Marathon a few years back. I know how hard it is to get to that race. I know a lot of people have been training for it, and it was just canceled. And so I think a lot of people, they pride themselves on being mentally tough, and they're having meltdowns because they're not sure, because the way that they had envisioned life unfolding is not the way that it unfolded. And that's actually always true. Like, we're always, from this moment on, it could unfold in many different ways. And we really have no control over that. And any control we think we have is actually just us telling ourselves we have that control, but we really don't. So I think that what you're seeing right now is like, there are a lot of chinks in our armor. I think what we consider to be mentally tough isn't necessarily so. I think what you're seeing is, well, you're specifically adapted to certain adversity. But if you want to become mentally tough, I think really what you want is all around resiliency. So no matter where I put you, you have the skills to take that adversity, turn it into a catalyst to actually progress your life, right? Because a lot of people are going to go through this pandemic, this adversity that we're in right now. 5 years or a year from now, they're going to be way worse versions of themselves, right? I talk to your students a little bit about that. It's like, when things start going wrong, it's like, if you don't know how to meet these adversities and use them as a springboard to get better, you're going to get worse. Very, very few people stay the same, right? Very few people can go through tragedy and not have any idea of how to cope with it and just stay the same. You're going to be a way worse version of who you are right now. And so then you have to ask yourself, it's like, then what are we talking about here? It's like, I think we're talking about how solid of a human being you are. And I think I used to succeed on a lot of self-loathing, which is probably why I brought that up when we talked about it before. It was like, I could manufacture a chip on my shoulder. I could act like the world is against me, and it got me really far. But what got you here might not get you there, right? And so that, I think what happens there is you become very specifically adapted to different adversities, and you lose the ability to be truly pliable, to be truly resistant to things. And I think I say resistant and pliable in the same sentence because that's really what they are. It's like, how can you're constantly meeting the environment coming at you. How can you use that to get stronger? It's like, we don't want to adapt in just very specific ways. And as a human being, I wrote a lot about this in my newest book, but like, we're opportunistic creatures. We've been adapting since day one to what's been coming at us. Right. It's only recently that we started trying to like control everything because we paved the jungle, and we thought maybe that like gave us some semblance of control. And now we're seeing like, no, that's not really there. Like, your life can be profoundly different the very next day. And in fact, it is now. And so I think if you try to succeed on these levels of self-loathing, then it makes you very susceptible to certain adversities, right? It makes it so you can only achieve, like, you can only succeed in certain arenas. And that's not what I'm in it for. Like I said, it's like, it's not about the game you're playing now. It's about all of the games you're going to play across the spectrum of your life. And that's what your legacy is going to be. And I think if you really want to be able to go from arena to arena and continue to be successful, then you can't have a meltdown when things go wrong. You know, it's like you have to learn to self-soothe in ways that are productive, that will actually be a catalyst for your growth. And I do believe that comes back to loving yourself.
Right on. Great stuff. You touched on kind of the preparedness in that. As an athlete, obviously preparation plays a big part. Overseas, being deployed, obviously, again, a huge part in all your training. You told a story about being in Africa with some of our kids, and I wanted to capture that. I wanted to hear it again. But could you share a little bit about that story and how it relates to being prepared?
Yeah, I opened up, I think it was in the first chapter of Burn Your Couch, my first book. So, you know, one of the things I didn't say in that story is, like, in the military, I had a real insomnia problems. Like, I'm talking 3 straight days of no sleep. Like, it was brutal sometimes. And that was probably a result of all kinds of different stressors. So the point of that is that I would always self-medicate to go to sleep. So I would take a ton of sleeping pills in order to fall asleep. But if I didn't, like, I will not sleep. And so just to set the scene, I'm in my hut in Africa. We're like in this, we're in the wire, and it's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. I mean, like, literally walking outside of the wire. We were leaving on a convoy the day before and saw this massive lion that was not at all fazed by our AMRAPs or anything. It's crazy. And so we're just like looking at it, and this thing like stares at us and then slowly walks off, like, just so you know, you're in my house. That's what it felt like. And so this is Africa, like you're thinking. And so I take these sleeping pills. I fall asleep in my hut, and I just hear like this knock on the door, and it's like getting louder. And I hear this girl outside, and I come out. I'm like, what? I'm all, you know, when you wake up after taking a bunch of sleeping pills and you feel like kind of drunk. So I'm like, yeah, you're like kind of out of it. So I come out, and she's like stammering out of it too. And I'm like, what is happening? And I'm like rubbing my eyes. She's like, you know, there's a plane crash, and I'm one of 3 medics here. And so when things go wrong in Africa, the reason I went through such a hard medical school is because you have to be able to sit on people for a long time, treat infection. So it's 24 to 48 hours to get a life flight out. Okay, so she tells me about this plane crash. It's like a plane crash at the strip, and obviously there's going to be casualties. I was like, oh, damn, okay. So I run into my locker. Where the airplanes land, like where the landing strip is not very far from where we stayed on base. And so it's like not even a mile. So I didn't grab any gear. I grabbed a fire extinguisher, which is super heavy, in my med bag. And other than that, I'm wearing like cutoff shorts and a hoodie. Like, I'm not ready to work. So I get in the car. I'm kind of waking up as we're driving out there, get to the airstrip, and nobody's there. And we're like, what the hell? And some guy's like out in the corner, he's waving at us. So we wave. He's like, hey, you got to go further down this dirt road. And we're like, okay, kind of bent around the airstrip. I'm like, man, they must have crashed in the woods trying to land or something right around there. Get to where he told us to go, and there's more people. I'm like, you got to go further, you got to go further. Finally, we get probably 4 or 5 miles by car and hit a point where we can no longer drive. And there's all these abandoned cars where I guess other people had been responding to this plane crash. So get out of I don't think I've ever told this story on a podcast. I'll try to make it quicker. So we get out of the truck, and I realize, like, I don't have anything with me. Like, I don't even have a compass. Like, I have nothing. I don't have a map. I don't know where I am. I'm in Africa. But I have a radio that one of the other medics grabbed. And so we could talk with a task force, which is in a plane overhead. So we start walking into the jungle, and basically this plane is vectoring us in. So we'd like walk for a while, look up, the plane would go overhead, and be like, oh shit, gotta go left. Go left for a while, we'd be walking, and the plane would come back over right. We're like, guess we're going right now. And that's how we're like moving through. And as you get deeper into the jungle, it gets harder and harder to walk. So by the end, after a few hours, we're low crawling now. I'm getting totally torn apart. Like, I mean, I have shorts on, like I'm getting ripped up by the African jungle. And in that moment, you know, as we start crawling, and my med bag's like getting caught on all the like pucker brushes and thorns and shit, it was awful. And the one of the medics, this girl, she starts like kind of sniveling, like kind of crying. And I'm like, just like hold it together. But I'm not really saying much because I'm in my own hell. I'm trying to talk to this task force. I'm trying to crawl. I'm trying to get to this damn plane, which feels a lot like we're not going to get to. Anyone that's alive surely doesn't need a medic at this point. And so anyway, it progresses. The guy that was with me, and both of them are in the military. Neither of them were special operations. And, I think that's fine. But they definitely didn't have a level of rigor in their training that I had gone through.
Sure.
And, after about an hour and a half of low crawling, we're starting to get a little closer, but the guy that's with me is like, he's like praying out loud. I mean, he's like nonsensical. Fear makes you mindless. I think the biggest problem with fear is if you give into it, you become mindless and you're no longer architecting your story. And I think you were seeing that, a little bit of that right now too. It's like, you can be fear, you can be scared, you can acknowledge the fear, but you can't get mindless, right? You can't let it run your life. And I think that's the real problem. And anyway, so he is though, and she's crying now, like bawling, sniveling, crying. And so I'm just like, listen, I'm like trying to talk them through it. But I've had this interesting moment where I remembered back to all of the training, all the instructors yelling, being muddy, being tired, being wrecked, like over and over for months at a time while I'm going through selection. And I thought it was so stupid then. Like, I'm just playing the game, whatever you need from me, like whatever, I just want to do the job, And I realized though, in that moment, that all of that adversity that I had been putting myself through was preparing me for this exact moment. And I can look back and the thing you realize is you never get to know when your moment, when your ticket comes up. And like I told the students when we talked, it's like you can never go back and get more training. So however prepared you are for the world to go to hell is how much preparedness you get to bring into it. That's how ready you are. And I think, so I mean, we did end up finding this plane crash. One person ended up being alive, and we ended up having to low crawl, drag him out for about 2 hours. And like I was treating him with morphine, basically just trying to maintain his airway. And just low crawl and pull this thing, low crawl, pull, low crawl, pull. By the time we had gotten out, it's like the sun is up. I'm covered in like my own blood, that dude's blood. Like it was just a mess. We'd been out there for 7 or 8 hours, legitimately. And at no point, and I don't like to use this as an example of like, wow, look how cool I am. Because actually I think it has nothing to do with me at all. Actually, it just had to do with me like continuously using traumatic experiences for growth. And so when I found one that I finally like found one that I didn't walk into on my own, but it was like, but this is what we do. We overcome, we figure it out. And I think building that into your character before it actually happens is, I actually just shared a line on my podcast today about how like you want to make the easy difficult. So when the difficult comes, you're ready. And I think that was the point of that story.
No, it was great. And Rick mentioned that as well. Go check out his podcast, Morning Coffee Podcast, MCP. It's great stuff. Love listening to it. Also along that journey of being prepared in your training, playing sports, was there a coach or a leader that really stuck out and had a greater influence on your life than maybe some of the other coaches and leaders that we have above us, per se?
Yeah. Man, it's really interesting that you say that, because I was like really thinking back and I was having a little bit of trouble. Of course, I had like mentors along the way and people, and I have mentors now. But if I'm being super honest, like I really, I'm a pretty spiritual person. Like we've talked about that a little bit. I really I think we're in a time where everybody has their own version of the truth, and it can be very relative, and it can be very hard to figure out what's actually true. And I think about a lot of the endurance events I've done, a lot of the books I've written, it's really because I'm just trying to figure out what's true. Like I'm on this weird quest for truth that like is like I'm going anywhere for. And I think about what I read, what I spend my time researching. It's like I really spend a lot of my time reading all of the sages. Like I read the Tao Te Ching, I read the Bible daily. Like I really, because what I think happens there is you have a distillation of wisdom, and wisdom is something like I think it's what has been always true. I think that's what wisdom is, and it helps you to cut through the bullshit in our culture to find out like what's actually true about life. Like how do things really go? How do we need to really act? And so I don't want to cop out of your question, but I think really I use a lot of I go to the sages because they've the wisdom has stood the test of time, and I'm trying to build a legacy that is bigger than this weird moment of our culture.
Right on. No, great answer. In your first book, Burn Your Couch, why should people set their couch ablaze, my man?
Right now you shouldn't, because it's all you have, because you're quarantined to it. Look, I think one of the things I notice is that our culture tends to mistake comfort and happiness quite often. And in fact, the two, in my experience, just aren't related. And, I tend to take an evolutionary view of the world. Like I look at evolutionary biology to think about how we've crafted ourselves. And if you rely on what your default setting is, like throughout evolution, throughout most of human history, and you could go back 6,000 years, or you could go back 6 billion years, doesn't really matter. Throughout human history, though, it didn't make sense to go out looking for more work, right? It really didn't. You had to survive. Survival was meaning in and of itself. And we're at a point in history now where that's no longer the case. Like there's no meaning found in just surviving, right? And in fact, if that's how you go through your life, it's actually probably going to suck. Like it's probably going to be kind of miserable, because we kind of have survival on lock. We have a lot of safety nets. We have things for that. And so now, though, we're at this interesting crux in our evolution where it's like, okay, so now we actually get to decide where we go from here. We get to decide the kind of people that we want to be. But if you rely on that default mode, I think it puts you on your couch binge watching Netflix. And we have a culture right now that makes binge watching Netflix a badge of honor in some way, right? And
yeah,
I think when you get to the end of your life, you're going to be your grandkids are going to be thoroughly unimpressed with stories about your couch. And so really the metaphor was like, this isn't what life's about, but if you don't go find what it is about for you, then this is what will happen. This is what it will be.
Right on.
Does that make sense?
Totally. I love it. So moving on, you've written your second book. I know you're working on some other future writings. What is it you're after? What kind of impact do you want to have on the world, and what drives you, or what lights that fire to have the positive impact you do? I know our athletes loved hearing from you, and I know you got a bright future impacting people in a great way, but what drives that?
Yeah. You know what it is and one of the reasons I really love talking to that population, like younger kids, is because my whole life I was being told what was true, and it just never seemed real to me. Like I was telling you, I had this desire, like I was like, I think I'm meant for more. I think I'm meant for something else. And everywhere I would look, nowhere would confirm that. That's how it felt. It was like, trying to think of the best way to describe it, but at the end of the day, I think that, like I said, I'm on this quest for truth. And what I've begun to find as true is that the highest good continuously emerges. And so I'm writing a book about like leadership, like kind of like sage leadership advice right now. And I'm realizing that throughout, actually love talking about this. So throughout time, what happens is when we get together, like groups of humans, we start to engage in groupthink, right? And so then what happens when we engage in groupthink is we begin to find belonging in what we're against, not what we're for. Right. And so we were like, oh, we're against them. Like they're not us. We're different. And so we find belonging in that group. And so what happens is when groups of people begin to engage in groupthink, they start to polarize and they start to create a void. And what I realize is throughout history is that leaders step up and fill that void, and they lead that group to their next evolution. Because when groups of people get together and they engage in groupthink, they become stagnant and they're no longer able to evolve. And so what happens is the highest good is always emerging throughout history. Now, you can look at what the content of that leader really matters, right? Because you can lead with fear and you can lead with love. And there are very different ways to go about it. You can look at 1930s Germany, very polarized. What happens when somebody leads with fear, right? We can see where that road goes, and it doesn't go anywhere good. And what's interesting is it's like the truth, though. The truth is love. So the truth is like always going to emerge. And so even if you can go up and you can gain a lot of people by scaring them into following you. But ultimately, we just look through time and those people just never win, right? They just really don't. It's like the emerging good is always, the highest good is always emerging as the truth. We can look at a time, 2-3 decades later, US history, we become very polarized, and the civil rights movement. And so we could use like Martin Luther King, who stepped up and filled that void with love, right? And against what a lot of people wanted him to do. It's like a lot of people were very critical of the way that he led, because he was all about nonviolence. He was all about love. And he was like, for him, there's a great quote that, unarmored truth and unconditional love will have the last word in reality. And I think that's what we're finding. And so I think what you see is throughout time is as these polarizations exist, there creates a void, and there's an opportunity for someone to step in and lead that group to their next evolution. And for one reason or another, I feel like my mind works that way. And so when you talk about legacy, it's like, I'm looking like, where are the voids? Where can love fill this hole right now and help us actually evolve to where we're supposed to be? I think you align yourself with that truth, and it's limitless what you can achieve.
Good stuff. So you talked about, looking back in time, looking back on a particular time, 16-year-old Rick, if you could go and share a piece of wisdom that you've acquired along your amazing journey, what would you go back and tell 16-year-old self?
I had to learn the lessons, so I wouldn't give him any lessons. I think like you have to learn them. Like in me, I'm like, I'll just go the hard way. It's like, hey, they can go that way or that way, but that way's treacherous. We don't really know where it goes. No one really gets through it. It's like, I have to go that way. And so the one thing that I would tell me is feeling broken is just as impermanent as feeling whole. And you're going to move through those cycles over and over throughout the course of your life. But who you are while you're in the middle of those cycles determines what happens next. And so there's times where, because I look back and I think about the heartbreak, I think about the things that didn't work out. And it's like how you carry yourself, who you become in those moments is what's going to decide the actual trajectory of your life.
Awesome. The one thing I always like to ask, I always find it fascinating, it's just, how do you define success? You've had an amazing journey. You've touched on the amazing things I believe you're going to do in the future. How do you wrap your head around that definition, and what do you chase?
Yeah, I'm trying not to chase anything these days, to be honest with you. And I think what happens, I work with a lot of my clients in this respect, is like, we think that life is about the accolades, we think it's about the achievements, and that's how we tend to define success. And what happens when you do that is you end up on this hedonic treadmill where you always get what you're after or don't, but then you fall back to your relative level of happiness. And so you're always chasing and you're never content. And so but like in life, there's nowhere to get. And so that's why, right? It's like, there is nowhere to get. So we always think like, if we could get this, then I'll be able to put my identity in it. I'll be able to I'll be happy. And at the end, it's always an amount of money or a thing we have to do. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to success, what you actually have to decide is, what is the game that you're playing? And if you decide the game that you're playing, the thing that's great is like, it's like going out. It's like if you're really committed in a relationship to somebody, right? You say yes to one person. At the same time, you're simultaneously saying no to billions, right? If you're doing it, like if you're actually committed to that one human. And so I think when it comes to success, it's like, you should be so clear about the game that you're playing that everything else is a no. Otherwise, you're going to care about how many likes you get, right? And like, for example, for me, it's like, I spend hours every day writing. I like lament over this stuff, right? And so, and Instagram is one of the platforms right now that we use to, to talk about our message and get ourselves out there. But there's a dog with an underbite that has 2.5 million followers. And it's like, am I going to put my craft up against this dog with an underbite? Like, this is nuts. But if you don't know the game you're playing, then, you're going to define success and you're going to be reaching all the time, and you're always going to be coming up short. And so for me, I realized like, I'm not in this for the business world. There are many ways that I thought that I was in this for, and I'm just not in it for any. Really, at the end of the day, I'm in it I want to create something impactful and something beautiful in the world. That's what I want to do. And so everything that I do it's put through that lens. Like, is this impactful? Is it beautiful? Does it resonate? That's it.